Okay, we have a lot to talk about. At a high level, I want to do kind of an end of year reflection on where I am with maybe this channel, some of the projects we're working on. I also really want to explain the future of what we're building with Cookwell. I've been terrible at doing that so far. And then I have pooled some Q&A questions from all of you. Everything's going to be timestamped down below, so jump around as much as you want. It's been probably almost 3 or so years since I've done a Q&A style video, so definitely lots to catch up on. So feel free to throw this on if you're doing some cooking around the holidays. This is probably just a good one to throw on in the background, treat it as maybe a podcast. But anyway, let's dive in. And really the first topic I want to explain is, what is Cookwell? What are we building? What is the entire point of all of it? And like I said, I've been bad at doing this because you may think, oh, is Cookwell a second YouTube channel? Is it a website? Is it a newsletter? Is it a way to sell products? And it's actually none of those. And really, we're missing this one piece that we're working on building behind the scenes. And this one piece is by far the biggest thing. But without it, the rest of the stuff is kind of pointless, frankly. Like, I'm not going to continue the YouTube. I'm not going to continue newsletter and all these other things we're doing unless we can figure out this missing piece and create this ecosystem where it's a mixture of home cooks, creators, and Cookwell all working in conjunction together. And our goal is to solve the single problem that every home cook has around the world. Every single home cook has this problem, and that problem is it's hard to feed yourself every day. So maybe that sounded a little dramatic, but really when you boil it down to these first principles, that is the problem we are trying to solve. And before I get to this missing piece and kind of some of the solutions and features we're building, I do want to explain our thought process behind this whole thing so you guys have the necessary context and can help me answer if we should continue building this. And first, there's kind of two questions to understand. First, why is it hard to feed yourself every day? And secondly, what are the problems with the current solutions out there, such as YouTube videos, cookbooks, recipe websites, and things of that nature? So we did this poll earlier this year, and you guys listed out some of your biggest pain points when it comes to the cooking process. And one of the biggest realizations that we had after reading through and kind of mapping all of everything is that the act of cooking is not what's hard. Like, I could give a complete beginner some ingredients and a recipe, and they'll be able to make something decent. But what holds people back from cooking more than they already do is everything that comes before and after the cooking process. For example, it takes a lot of time to meal plan. Produce goes to waste before you can use it. It's hard to cook for one person without having to eat the same thing for 4 straight days. How do I use up my leftovers and make them into something new? How do I use up expensive one-time ingredients? It's hard to find recipes that fit my health and fitness goals, or I wish I could go grocery shopping without needing to do a bunch of planning. And there are 2 reasons that make all of this even more harder. First, everyone's problems are based on their unique human constraints, such as your age, your budget, your time, job, family, experience level. And secondly, these human constraints change throughout your life. So let's take grocery shopping as an example. So as a college student, you may only need to shop for yourself, which is pretty easy, but you probably have a pretty limited budget to shop with. A few years later, maybe you get your first job and you have some more money to spend on ingredients and grocery shop, but you're now buying more ingredients to expand the amount of recipes you make, and a lot of your ingredients are now going to waste. And maybe several years later after that, when you have kids and a family, you're no longer just shopping for yourself, but need to figure out how to grocery shop effectively for 4, 6, or 8 people. And all of these are grocery-related problems, but the constraints are completely different depending on where you are with your life. And by using the term Cookwell, I don't mean to help you cook well like a chef or something. That's not the point at all. It really means to help you cook well for life. And really, with all the solutions we're building, we're trying to figure out, how do we help you cook well for what life looks like right now, but also what life will look like in the future. And this is an example of what I feel is not being served in the current landscape with cookbooks, YouTube videos, websites, and things of that nature. So let's walk through them. As a home cook, there are many different places where you can go to get inspiration, source your ingredients, start cooking, and feed yourself. But all of them tend to have some downsides when you're really looking at this from a perspective of, how do we help you feed yourself every day? For example, let's start with recipe websites. Recipe websites are generally free to access, which is great. However, once you get there, they feel basically unusable due to all of the ads. There's header ads, there's footer ads, left margin, right margin, video player ads. There's just so many of them. And then there's just walls of text, because what most websites are trying to do is optimize kind of the time you spend on the page so more ads can be shown to optimize ultimately the ad revenue you end up earning. And then outside of that, there is no continuity between recipes. Like, some recipe websites, you may like how they write their recipes, but then maybe they don't have a lot of the recipes that you want to make. And then vice versa, maybe some places have the recipe you want to make, but you just don't like the layout and how they're set up. And this is one of the problems we've already tried to solve with cookwell.com, where, again, there's no ads on there at all, and we hope to keep it that way. I'll explain why a little bit later. But we have built in the fundamentals as well. So all of the recipes have this very clear structure from recipe to recipe, and we think it's a really great one, but just one example of where kind of current recipe websites really tend to fall flat. And then if we turn back the clock and look at another common solution, are cookbooks. Cookbooks are beautiful. They have tons of recipes and obviously have no ads because you paid for the book, but it tends to not be a very useful format, especially on like a quick weeknight or something. For example, if you're trying to plan out a couple of meals, you generally don't pull out the cookbook and like flip between the pages. It's also hard to like get your grocery list together if you did pick out 3 recipes. It's like, okay, there's onion here, half an onion there, and you're like kind of flipping back and forth. And then again, cookbooks feel more of like a luxury of time product where, yeah, if it's around the holidays or maybe on the weekend, bust out the cookbook, find something that looks amazing and make it. But if it's like a Tuesday night at 7 p.m., you're not pulling out the cookbook to try to figure out something you need to make in the next 20 minutes. Another solution are meal kit subscriptions, which genuinely do help solve the waste problem, as they typically send you exactly what you need to make the recipes. But these tend to have a very high per meal cost, especially when compared to regular grocery shopping. And the menus tend to be limited, and you kind of become reliant on these meal kit subscriptions rather than empowered by them. Next up, we have video content, which is obviously my personal favorite and is probably the most popular format these days between short form and long form content. It's so good at helping you find inspiration and visually see how something is made. However, again, video content does have its shortcomings. For one, a lot of content is generally created to entertain in order to get more views, appease your sponsors, and conform to algorithm changes. And over time, to me, it feels like a lot of content just ends up becoming the same. Like, we do not need more pizza, burger, and steak videos. There's so many at this point. Another example is maybe you see a viral TikTok recipe and you're like, ooh, that looks good, I want to make it. But then you go to the grocery store, end up spending like 50 or 60 bucks. A lot of times, maybe it's not as good as you thought and you have random leftover ingredients. You probably should have just grabbed takeout in that case. And then on the other side, I have created like several of these kind of framework and protocol videos. But the problem with those is, if it's a good video, like if it's a good framework and protocol, I really should only make that video once. And then it's kind of up to you guys to figure out examples. Like, yes, I could make a braising framework video every month with just 3 examples, but to me, that's just kind of boring. Like, I've already said what I wanted to say in that original framework video. And then you're also not going to be served that framework video again. Like, YouTube's not going to just give you the same video like 3 months later. There's no way to remind you of that information. And I think a lot of it tends to just be forgotten over time. And I will say, the protocols and frameworks are one of the pieces we are really trying to figure out how to properly build into this missing piece that I'm going to get to shortly. But lastly, I do want to talk about kind of a 5th category, which I would say is a blanket group of like paid content subscriptions, whether it's a newsletter, maybe it's a creator making videos for their followers on like a subscription, YouTube membership, something like that. And really the downside with this model for me is that what I love about posting YouTube videos is I get to share something I'm passionate about and I learned, and like, I don't know who is end up going to watching that video when I post it out. If I'm posting it in a paid community, only the paid members are going to be able to see that video, which to me, I feel like it loses some of its like excitement versus if I can put this thing out there and maybe it reaches 1 million or 2 million people who have never heard of the topic of the video before, maybe that inspires them in some way to cook. So for me, I don't love the idea of kind of like paid content. I don't know. I'm just not a fan. So really, when you pull back the layers of these solutions that I've just kind of mentioned, and if you're looking at this from the perspective of how do we help you feed yourself every single day, all of them tend to have downsides, and all of these downsides are kind of correlated with the problems that creators face. For example, it's hard to figure out how to be a creator. How do you do it financially? How do you do it content-wise? How do you do it from a work-life balance perspective? And like I was kind of mentioning, your recipe websites, they probably don't want to write big walls of text, but they're kind of incentivized to do that based on the playground of ad revenue and how all that works. And then again, paid content subscriptions are a way to kind of stabilize your revenue, but then it also becomes dependent on you continually putting out content. Like a Twitch streamer, for example, if they have like a bunch of subscribers one month, but then stop streaming for a month or two, like all that revenue kind of goes away. And really, we are trying to figure out not only how do we help solve the problem of home cooks and how we help feed themselves every day, but how can we support creators as well and work in an ecosystem together? And that brings me to the missing piece. The missing piece we want to build is the Cookwell companion app. Still working out the naming and things like that, but in the beginning, we want to launch with 4 key features. First is the food feed. Cooking for yourself on a consistent basis comes down to staying inspired and having ideas on what you can make with what you already have. And imagine how fun and exciting it would be if you could open up an app with a feed and see new recipes, protocols, and frameworks that are suited to you and gets better over time. Additionally, we want to have a steady supply of educational content from the fundamentals to keep you learning. And if a recipe calls your name from this feed, the second feature is the world's best grocery list and shopping frameworks. And this is an intuitive space where you can make freeform grocery lists like you would in your Notes app, or choose from existing templates to help you get started. And we think this is going to be better than the current solutions on the market because it will have ingredient metadata similar to what you find on our recipes, such as flavor tags, grocery categories, or you can add whatever metadata you want. Or these could also be frameworks and shopping lists based on cuisine. So if you want to make several different Indian dishes, we could kind of give you a starting point for what are the common ingredients in the pantry, the fridge, and things of that nature. And thirdly, we want to have intuitive cataloging, combining, and saving features so you can go back and see what you've shopped for in the past and repeat these successful shopping trips from your archive. The third piece is the eating calendar and meal plan templates. Again, still working out naming, but don't think of this as just a meal planner. Really think about this as a feeding calendar. This calendar is a way for you to visualize how you're eating throughout the week, whether you are cooking or you're not. You can use the feed or this calendar to drag and drop certain recipes into your week, write in freeform notes about ingredients you're planning to use up, or slot in events where you have meals covered. For example, you could add a leftover reminder, you could add you're having lunch with coworkers so you don't need to cook, or you can also let someone else do the thinking for you and slot in maybe 5 meals at once. For example, you could take 5 lunches from some of my videos in the past, make them into one little calendar and just pop it in there. And it's like, hey, I'm just going to eat these and make these throughout the week, which then link back to the grocery list, help you shop, and then help you feed yourself throughout the entire week. And then lastly, we want to figure out the Let's Cook button. So imagine you find yourself on like 6:30 or 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. and you kind of need to throw something together. You're like thinking about getting takeout. The idea here is that we want to be able to prompt you based on ingredients you may already have in the pantry, in the fridge, the freezer, and help you along that process so you can figure out what you can make right now without needing to run to the store or maybe resort to takeout. And hopefully that will just save you from a trip and obviously save you money over time. And additionally to all of this, there will be a profile where you can save recipes, kind of have updated stats and things that you're doing just to make sure you're keeping track of this and really looking at this of how do we help you feed yourself every day, and then how do we help you cook for what life looks like now? How do we help you cook well for what life looks like in the future? And the goal of this companion app is to make it a utility that you literally can use every single day. For example, when you need to listen to something, what do? You open up the Spotify app. When you need to watch something, Netflix, HBO, or whatever your favorite streaming service is. If you need to get a ride, you open up the Uber app. You need to order takeout, DoorDash, for example. And that is the level of thinking that I want to build this app to. How do I help feed myself today? I'm opening up the Cookwell app, and maybe you go to the food feed because you need to be inspired. Maybe you already have something planned in your calendar. Maybe you need to go grocery shopping, and we give you a kickstart with, an Indian cuisine based template, or maybe a healthy kind of high protein template. And then how do we help you track and remind you of that information over time is really how we're approaching this. And I think we can build it, but there's a few things that are kind of holding us back. The first thing holding us back is a lack of content. And here's where I want to explain how the paid companion app fits in with the other existing offerings we already have. So currently, Cookwell kind of has three offerings. We have Cookwell.com, which has our recipes and fundamentals. We have Cookwell content, which includes the Cookwell YouTube channel, the Mouthful newsletter, and then we have individual creators content. An example of that is this main channel here, Ethan Chlebowski, not Cookwell, different entities. I got to try to keep this straight here. Now, one of the big things that we want to do is, yes, build out our own Cookwell content. We want to build out the Cookwell YouTube channel, the newsletter. We've got short form ideas. We've got all these ideas of amazing content we can make. But additionally, we want to partner with individual creators to get their recipes, to get their grocery templates, to get their shopping frameworks. And it's all based off of existing content they're already making. Now, obviously, if a creator is going to drive a sign up for a paid companion app, we want to have a direct revenue split. For example, why do creators want to be on YouTube? Why do they want to be on Twitch? It's because they have really good partner programs, and we want to do the exact same thing with Cookwell. If, for example, you see the Cookwell app on Ethan Chlebowski and you sign up with my code, so code Ethan, I get a direct revenue split for that sign up, and then that stays with me month over month as long as the user signs up. Now, what's better here is instead of me having an individual like Patreon or a course I made or something of that nature, that is still reliant on solely me to continually churn out that new content or continually updating the paid community and things of that nature. However, in this case, it's Cookwell's responsibility to make a product that is so good that people want to sign up and that they want to stay signed up regardless of if their favorite creator is continuing to put out content. For example, if I need to spend an extra week or two on a video, I don't need to worry about, I told the sponsor I'd have it done by, November 23rd, so I got to just get it done, but I'd love to spend another week. Instead, maybe I'd be like, you know what? I have this reliable Cookwell monthly income. I'm just going to forego the sponsor this month around because I know that a lot of people may sign up with the app, and I have existing recurring revenue that's coming in. So that's like a big piece of all this. We need to be able to support creators so we can help them focus on continually making great content and releasing it for all of you guys. Because like I said earlier, that's one of my favorite things is I like just releasing it. And it's like, I don't know how many people it's going to reach. Maybe it only reaches, 100,000 or 50,000 or a couple 100,000. Sometimes it reaches millions. And that is like one of the greatest things that like content creators do is being able to make something that you're passionate about and just sharing it with the world, and you never know who you're going to reach. So that's kind of number one. And then obviously we're going to use the revenue to make the companion app better and better over time. We want to build out the features. We already have so many other ideas of things that we can build outside of those four I kind of outlined, but obviously we need that revenue to continually make that thing better and better over every single month. Then additionally, it's not just up to creators to create the content. Cookwell as a kind of entity, again, try to separate the two. Don't think of just me. But I would love to continually build it out and get like a Cookwell kitchen where we have like maybe a food scientist or two on staff so we can continually build out Cookwell.com, the recipes on there, and we want to keep that completely ad-free. Like I want to continually update the recipes there and make it a free resource for everyone around the world. So there's so many things that really I think we can do if we make this model correctly. And I don't know, we'll see what happens. I have never felt like that this needs to exist. Like I've asked myself so many times, like, do we actually need to build this? Like, would this actually make the world a better place? And I really think it would. I think it would deliver so much value across everyone, to home cooks, to creators, to Cookwell, and we can keep this thing rolling and really bring like home cooking to this place where it's really never been before. So over the next couple of months, we've got to talk with creators and figure out if they want to be a part of this. So if there's any creators watching this video, drop a comment down below. If not, I'll reach out probably in the next few months here. And if any people are watching, let me know of creators who you might think will be a good fit for this. We'll probably need to start with a few people in the beginning, and then we can build out from there. But I don't know, sky's the limit. And then the second thing holding us back now is kind of funding. So up to now, like, we've been able to fund everything really through this channel, the ad revenue, the sponsorship deals. But it's a really small team. It's myself, and there's 2 other full-time people, like specifically on just Cookwell. So we're a really small team. And yeah, hopefully you can tell the scope of this has gotten a lot bigger than like a small team can do. Like, we need to hire more people to, like, technically from a, engineering level, be able to build this. So like, I'm kind of at that point where like, I can't hire any more people. So funding is another thing. We're trying to figure that out. I think I would like to see if we could do a Kickstarter. So let me know down in the comments if you guys would be open to doing a Kickstarter and would be, helping us support this and getting it off the ground. And then if a Kickstarter doesn't work, like, I'm down to see if we can go maybe like venture capital route. I'd like to avoid that if we can, just because when you bring an outside investor in, maybe they have a slightly different vision and they want to get value out of the investment, which, like, I don't know, can just get messy. And like this whole Cookwell thing is solely for home cooks and to help support all of you guys and help you feed yourself every single day. So I'd kind of like to avoid that if we can. But I'll have some more information on that in 2025 probably. But yeah, other than that, I would just love to know your thoughts on all of this. That was probably a lot of information. Hopefully it was fairly cohesive. Like I said, there's so much behind the scenes work that like has just been going on in addition to like just this YouTube channel. But I really could not be more excited about the possibilities of what we can build and to get it into all of yours hands, just because, like, I've heard from you guys the past 5, 6, 7 years now. And like, I feel like I hear the same problems over and over and over again about, pain points and problems and content types. And really, I feel like currently today, there's not a solution that is really trying to approach this from like, how do we help home cooks feed themselves every single day and repeat that process every single day? But anyway, now it's time to get into the Q&A. I pulled out some questions, so let me grab a drink of water. My voice is a little parched, and I'll be right back. A little afternoon iced coffee, a little pep me up. Let's get into these questions. So yeah, I just picked out a few of these, several of them. Some are quicker, some are going to take a little bit longer, so we'll just kind of hop right into them. First 2 are kind of related. So what made you pivot from the recipe-based content on the main channel to more deep dive content? And then similarly, how did you come to the current video format where it's purely deep dives rather than, recipe-based content like a lot of cooking channels? So from the beginning, none of this was intentional at all. I basically just asked questions and was interested in making these videos. That's something for me that every video on this channel you see is I am personally interested in making the video. Like, it starts with a question I have myself, and then I genuinely do want to figure it out. A lot of other big YouTube channels, like, they may do a big ideation process, and it's like, here's like what the title would be, here's what the thumbnail would be, and then you kind of make the video after the fact. I'm the complete opposite, where the video for me and like what we're going to talk about is by far the most important piece. I don't really care about like the thumbnail or the title. If I didn't have to worry about those, like, I mean, that's kind of my least favorite part about YouTube is like title and thumbnail stuff. I genuinely love getting into these details and just asking myself questions about food. And I think one of the first deep dives was that San Marzano tomato video, where it's just like, I asked myself, why does everyone say that you should buy San Marzano tomatoes? And I was kind of wondering, well, how different are they really, And a lot of maybe the articles or books that you see out there on them, they never really show anybody testing anything. They may have done testing, but they never show you kind of what maybe their reactions are. And it feels like this very like if you just get a list of like the top canned tomatoes, it feels like this very clear binary decision where it's like, oh, this is just the best. However, as I found out in that first video, I was like, well, there are definitely differences in them. And I think one of the big differences that we learned in that video is that Cans with tomato puree are definitely a little bit sweeter and less acidic than some of the other varieties. But really, the value of that video for me is not to buy the best brand of tomatoes. It is to look for certain things on the can. And then on the flip side as well, if you do not have access to those cans, understanding that they might be more acidic, you can then make adjustments. So you could add a little bit of sugar to your tomato sauce or maybe some tomato paste and things like that. And then obviously that first video did well, but it really just started from me asking questions. And then, yeah, like I said, I think over maybe the past 2 years, like it's kind of just cascaded down that way. Everything starts with me asking a question I am personally interested, I want to find the answers to, and then I need to learn all of this myself to then be able to put it into a video that makes sense to all of you guys. And a lot of my time is really just spent kind of thinking about reading and looking at these kind of very fundamental concepts. So that's really how it happened. There's not a specific reason why I was like, I'm not doing recipe content anymore. In fact, I'm kind of missing recipe content. So that's mainly what I'm doing on the second Cookwell YouTube channel. And then eventually, if we can grow that out, I do want to go back into more recipe-based kind of deep dives and cuisine deep dives and things of this nature. Because now that I'm doing all these ingredient deep dives, I've kind of opened up Pandora's box. So every ingredient deep dive, there are a lot of fundamental things we find out and a lot of questions I have. And I find a lot of answers to those questions. But at the end of the deep dive, and this might be true for you guys too, I end up having a lot more questions than answers. That's just the nature of how those videos work, because we're really getting down to the first principles. And it's like, ooh, I wonder how butter would be in like the croissant. Like that's a whole nother video. So for every deep dive I make, I have about 100 video ideas while I'm making that based on that single ingredient deep dive. And for me right now, I'm just having fun making the deep dives. Like every time I walk through the grocery store, I'm looking at just various items. And I'm like, for example, I was in the grocery store the other day. I'm like, ooh, the peanut butter aisle. You know, it's just seems interesting. There's a lot of options at the peanut butter aisle. Caviar, all of these just started with questions about ingredients that I've had. And I think a lot of times, you know, cooking is always just focused on like recipe-based stuff, but a lot of cooking is understanding the ingredients you're using. So for me, it just feels like a very useful video to make, because the next time I walk through the grocery store, I now understand tomatoes. I understand butter. I understand how coffee works. I understand how, what else have we done? Parmesan cheese and all these things. So it really feels like, me personally, and hopefully you guys feel this too, like kind of collecting this knowledge and figuring out how to use it and compartmentalizing it is just really fun to make. It's really fascinating. And yeah, I love making the recipe deep dives. And like I said, I have literally unlimited video ideas. I'll never run out of ideas. And this is another reason why I hope we can make Cookwell work, because I'd love to see more creators making more kind of deep dive educational content, whether it's specific ingredients or going deep down rabbit holes into recipes, just because I literally have more ideas than I'll never be able to make all the videos that I possibly want to make. Okay, next up, we have what's your hottest cooking take that will get you canceled? So these aren't going to get me canceled, but I've got a couple of takes I want to get off my chest here. I've actually been thinking about making videos about some of these, but the first one that is on the top of my mind right now, especially with it being Christmas time, is that a rib roast or prime rib is just the worst possible way that you could use a rib roast. And I'll explain why that is. So a rib roast is where ribeye steaks come from, right? And, you know, they look amazing. And I think that's why people like them. They're just this very visual piece with like the bones sticking out, and it's like this nice sliceable thing. But the problem I have with rib roasts is that you end up with basically no browning, and mostly what you're eating is just like medium rare meat with no browning on it. Like a piece of prime rib only has browning around the outside, and then you're eating mostly just like medium rare meat. So you have to have a sauce. But my thing is, why would you not just get a ribeye? Like if you want to make a rib roast, why would you not just, you could get a rib roast and then just slice it into ribeyes, and then you get browning around the entire thing. Like what makes steak good is the Maillard reaction and all that browning we get on the outside. So you're literally just eating this big hunk of generally unseasoned meat as well, because it takes so long for the salt to move in, even if you dry brine it, that the whole rib roast would take 2 to 3 days for that salt to actually work in there. So that's a lot of times why you also see it served with a sauce, because you are just eating, medium rare meat that is also just worse texturally. Like it's worse from a texture perspective. It's worse from an aroma perspective. You need to add a sauce to it. So for me, just rib roasts literally make no sense at all. I understand they look cool and maybe a tradition and things like that. But from a food science perspective, I would say it's probably one of the worst ways that you could use that cut of meat. Okay, second one is that washing rice just very overstated. And actually a lot of cooking, this is maybe another take I'm working on, is a lot of cooking advice is very overstated on how much it really matters. And this is something that I've been thinking about a lot recently. Like when someone tells you a very specific ingredient to use, or a very specific ratio of like a spice, or and like some of this stuff does matter, but a lot of cooking advice is generally overstated. And let me think about some other examples of that. So, I've definitely done this too. Like I am just as guilty as this as anyone else, especially in the early days. Like the orbital versus pole to pole cut onions. Like, does it make a difference? Yes. Does it matter so much on like a recipe by recipe basis? Not that much. Like it really depends on what you're making. Do I still cut my onions pole to pole? Yes. The main reason though is just because I kind of like the texture, and I don't know, I just like, but it doesn't matter as much as maybe that video would make it seem. And I think that's a bias that you really need to be careful about. And recently in the deep dives, I want to be very careful, and I want to go in with basically no assumptions. And I try to not give any bias, or it really become like just wide-eyed and making no assumptions about anything, because I think that is one of the problems that I've done in the past, and I think just cooking content in general comes into, is people are kind of driving towards like a specific hypothesis and maybe fitting it to meet something rather than just giving observations, which is really what I try to do now in these videos. Because there are a million different technique changes that you can do. And I think people have very, very strongly held opinions about a million different cooking tips. Like, let me know down in the comments. But there are so many like very strongly held opinions that if you were to actually test a lot of this stuff by side, you'd be like, okay, well, it's not that big of a deal. So that's kind of one of the takes I've been working on. Maybe I'll make a video on that one day, and we'll make a big long list, and not myth bust, but I could come up with so many examples of like kind of overstated cooking advice, like washing your rice. For most people, and it really depends on how you cook it, really not necessary at all. I think maybe that was kind of just Uncle Roger just saying one talking point over and over and over again. But that's an example. I mean, there's so many out there. So those are kind of my takes. Prime rib or rib roast, very overrated. Like, slice it up into ribeyes, serve it that way. It's just going to be way better. And then a lot of cooking advice is overstated, washing rice or certain things. So be careful about that when you're watching videos or recipes and that type of thing. All right, next up, what were your biggest influences on how you learned to cook the way you do, such as cookbooks, food writers, YouTube, TV, all that? So I think I originally would watch kind of food cooking shows, like kind of classic, cable. So Good Eats, I loved watching Good Eats with Alton Brown. And now that was like kind of a little bit full circle. I actually met Alton earlier this summer, and a lot of people will say like, oh, this kind of feels like an Alton Brown show, which for me, I like that because, I grew up watching, the Good Eats show. I also watched Top Chef a lot growing up, like when I was in high school and stuff, more of an entertainment show, less so on the education side. And then for YouTube wise, I think Babish was probably my first food cooking YouTube channel. I think probably so many of you. And then non-food related though to YouTube was Jeff Nippard. So Jeff Nippard has a kind of science approach for, health and fitness. And I watched a ton of his videos as well when I was coming up. And I really like that idea of kind of approaching things from that fundamental level. So yeah, I mean, that's another example where you can totally see by like blending the Jeff Nippard style that I used to watch growing up into some of this. And then also, I think I really admire currently like Cleo Abram and Johnny Harris and their style. yeah, I feel like they're really good at explaining topics. That's something I want to definitely get better at. So that's currently what I watch. As far as cookbooks and stuff, I would say On Food and Cooking, obviously. I still reference that one a lot. Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat by Samin Nosrat. The Food Lab, obviously, from Kenji. So those were kind of some of the early influences. And then recently, I've kind of I don't really read or watch much cooking or food related stuff anymore because really I've been trying. One of the things we've been building for on cookwell.com, for example, is the flavor framework and trying to approach it from that fundamental level, because one of the problems I had when we were going into deep dives is I realized I was always talking about these concepts like, oh, when we're talking vanilla, we're really just talking about the smell. We're not talking about taste and things of that nature. So I kept running into this issue where it was hard for me to put into words what I was trying to describe from ingredient to ingredient. So in the past, what I was doing was just kind of reading stuff and then trying to piece everything together and coming up with different tests. But now that we have the fundamentals, I approach it from the fundamentals we're trying to build on Cookwell. So what are the fundamentals of flavor? It is taste, it is aroma, it's texture, it is the physical element, it's human, it is sight. And trying to really break down ingredients from that level. And then additionally to that, we had to figure out how is flavor created? So for taste, it's like, molecules and things are hitting your tongue. So we're like, oh, we need to talk about molecules because the molecules in food dictate what type of reactions they can go through in cooking. Those reactions dictate how the molecules can change, which ultimately is what turns into the taste, the aroma, the texture, and all these various things. So that really has changed a lot. I've really just been approaching things from maybe a classical, like kind of philosophy or science-based method where it's what are the first principles of what we're talking about and then build it up from there. So really building up from the ground up. So I really don't read a lot of kind of cookbooks or like watch a lot of YouTube videos or other videos anymore, just because I need to be able to understand the topics I'm talking about. I really need to start at like the bare bones, like, okay, butter is 80% fat, 15% water, 1% protein, and then we got to build up from there. And then that is where I may read studies and articles and things of that nature. So that's really changed a lot over the year. I definitely consume much less, kind of cooking YouTube, food YouTube than I used to, mainly just because I'm kind of needing to build and do the research and information myself to understand it, because a lot of it is not really approaching it from like that ground up level. And I think that actually brings me to the next question. I think someone asked, so Austin asked, what's the most time consuming part of your process making deep dive videos? Always impressed with the amount of research. Makes me curious how much is kind of going on behind the scenes that we don't see. Yeah, so by far the most time spent on deep dives is really like thinking, reading, asking myself questions, repeating that process over and over and over again, and then slowly building it into what are some things that we should test, what should we talk about in the script, and then that takes a lot of the time. And then as I'm writing out the script, I am visually thinking in my brain how we're going to turn this into a video. And as far as each video, it really depends on the amount of time. So an example of a video that took so much time to think through and research was the coffee video. It took me a few months probably. We had the idea a long time ago. I was like, oh yeah, we should definitely do a video about coffee or like coffee brewing and things of that nature. But then as I got into it, there's millions of rabbit holes. Like I said, the nature of the deep dive videos is it starts with a very simple question, and then each of those questions has like 5 more questions that could each lead to 5 more. So one of the hard part about making the deep dives is like, where do you explain certain areas or where do you kind of strip back? So a lot of videos, even though some of them may seem pretty complex, they're generally stripped back to a level that I feel comfortable communicating. And this is still a work in progress. Like the deep dives are mentally very challenging. A lot of the times, like I have a bunch of research and then I'll just need to like passively sit with it. Like I'm not just on my computer grinding out the script. Like it's like, okay, I've done some deep work writing. Now I just kind of need to passively think about it. Like when I'm going for a walk, when I'm working out, when I'm, going to a coffee shop or whatever. I just need to kind of have those ideas floating around in my head. And then generally, again, then I'll come back and can read through what we've talked about, what we've scripted out, or there's tests that we've done. So in general, there's kind of 4 stages where it's just kind of research, asking questions, ideation of the tests. Then from there, it's like, okay, let's probably do some testing and kind of piece together what the script may look like. And then that can happen for several days. I wish I had a better answer. We're getting better now. Now that we have kind of this clear direction, this is something I've really been working on because visually these videos are very hard. It's not like, I think other channels may have like a format for their videos where it's like you just kind of insert new topic and go. For each deep dive topic, it depends on the concept of the food item that we're talking about, what matters and what doesn't. So when we're talking about coffee, like aroma is very important. Taste is also important, but then understanding all these little things of how the aroma changes is really important. And we got to talk a lot more about, the processing and how it's harvested and how it's roasted. And there's so much that goes into that versus something that is simpler like caviar. Caviar is a raw material that comes from sturgeon and its eggs, and you don't really cook with sturgeon. You kind of just scoop it out. It's salty and briny, and that was one of the things in that video. It's like all of it's kind of salty and briny, and it does taste different, but in no way would I would not advise going out and buying like a $2 or $3 or $400 tin of sturgeon like for your first time. Just go get a cheap one and see if you like it. But that's an example where it's just we're talking kind of taste and aroma, and like I can't cook with caviar, so it's just much simpler to do. So yeah, they're always a work in progress. Like again, I have so many ideas for deep dives, and that's why like I hope we can make more of them. But a lot of my time is just spent like asking myself all these questions, approaching them from a fundamental level, and trying to build it back up, thinking about tests that we can do that can explain and get to these fundamentals that we're talking about. And then ultimately help explain this ingredient to all of you guys where if you're using it in your cooking or if you're in the grocery store, you can understand the underlying principles of the ingredient rather than just looking for a specific brand. Because for me, the value in those videos is not go buy XYZ brand because it's the best. I think that's just pointless because surely there's more than one brand in the world that is worth buying, whether it's butter, milk, tomatoes, whatever. So my goal is to always break it down to its fundamental components and really give you that information. I don't want to be like judge, jury, executioner of here is the best brand to buy, go buy it, and that's going to solve all your problems, because that's not going to. You need to understand how the ingredient works, how it works in cooking, and how it creates the flavor of the particular ingredient. So yeah, I don't know if that was a good answer. Next Q&A, I will have a better answer, and I will try to come up with a more defined workflow. But for example, some of these Notion docs, I'll pop up maybe the word count, 95% like scripted out completely. Like I'm writing everything just because if I'm going to talk about these thoughts, I need to be able to write them down because I'm just going to be stumbling over my words if I'm trying to talk about the Maillard reaction and how it's different in coffee and pyrolysis and all these other things that are going on. So I need to be able to write it out very succinctly. So these scripts are massive, absolutely massive. But yeah, I'll get a better answer next time around. Okay, next up, what's been your favorite recipe/video of the year? I'll start with favorite recipe, and this is not, well, actually, a video is coming out on the Cookwell channel for beef rendang. That is I made it probably 6 or 7 months ago for the first time. Beef rendang, unbelievably good, and I would highly recommend all of you try making it at home. It's really easy to make. You just need to find lemongrass and galangal are kind of the hard ingredients to find, but an unbelievable recipe. So that's kind of my favorite new recipe. Again, no deep dive video or anything that's been done on that. As far as my favorite deep dive video of the year, the most challenging was coffee for sure. The most surprising one was maybe caviar. I don't know, maybe I'm just not a big caviar fan, but I thought it would be better and more interesting than it was. And then when I tasted it, I was like, maybe I'm just not a big caviar guy. As far as the one I'm most satisfied with, definitely kind of the past couple. I feel like we've really gotten the structure down a little bit better when it becomes like me being able to script it out a little bit more cohesively. And then also Spencer, my editor, and I, we're kind of getting in a little bit better flow with kind of how we're showing graphics and making them a little bit more consistent from video to video. Because another thing that I really want to be able to convey is to give you that sense of place with flavor. So if you realize, we constantly kind of mention other deep dive videos in the deep dive. Like I think in the butter video, we mentioned the salt deep dive, and I want to be able to do that. So I think the most recent one is probably the one I'm most satisfied with overall, but that'll probably just happen for the rest of the time. Okay, so I think I'll round this out with how did I get into cooking and how did I kind of become a food YouTuber, because I think I've mentioned this maybe at my 100K video, which was probably like 3 or 4 years ago at this point, but I haven't really talked about it for anyone that might be new here. So how I got into cooking when I was younger was my grandma. So she would always like do baked goods, like bread rolls, Bellish, some other Polish recipes. And every time she came visited us or we went to visit her, she would always make these, and I just love the food. So what got me into cooking is I wanted to be able to recreate this stuff without having to go visit her or without having to wait until she came visit us around the holidays. So that's really how I got into cooking and got it, for the first time. And then over time, kind of through middle school and high school, both my parents basically cooked us, a homemade meal every single night. Like my parents, they're not chefs or anything. They just happen to like cooking and, grew up cooking from cookbooks and things of this nature. I have 3 brothers, so they would kind of cook every night. So it just was a very normal thing in my family, like to be cooking. So naturally, like we would kind of help out with dinner as we got older. And then when I got into college, it was just like, well, I'm just going to cook because like that's what I know how to do. So I do all my shopping. There was probably a year or two where my roommates and I would do all the cooking for my roommates and they would just clean up. It's just something that I've always done. And then what got me into YouTube was actually because of my first job. So I graduated from NC State with an accounting degree of all things, if you believe that. And I went to work for Deloitte in consulting. And then in consulting, I was traveling every, Monday through Friday, literally just the entire time. Like a lot of different cities. It was fun in the beginning, and then the travel kind of wore on me. It just like, you're like, I don't want to wake up for another, 6 a.m. Monday flight and then fly back late Thursday night and repeat that process every week. And because of that, I was just missing cooking. I wasn't able to cook Monday through Thursday. And then like on the weekend, I'd just be like kind of tired and be like, I don't even feel like cooking anymore. So starting the YouTube channel was kind of a creative outlet that got me back into cooking. And I was like, ooh, I'm going to come home on Thursday night and then work Friday. And then Saturday and Sunday, like I'm going to figure out a video to make. And then I ended up completely falling in love with that process. I posted like one video a year, got to 900 subscribers, and then decided to quit my job at Deloitte. So, most people would not advise that route. I had not made a cent off of anything. I had 900 followers. But for me, I'm very much of like I need to know, and I want a cut point where it's like, I either want to know that I genuinely like this and can make it work, or if it doesn't, I'll go back and get a job. And that was why I decided to leave Deloitte. I was just like, well, I'm kind of looking at switching jobs, or maybe I'll go back and get my MBA or my master's in something. And I was like, well, I really like this YouTube thing. What if I just spent a year or two and just see what happens? So that's what I did. I quit my job. I moved back home and started posting like 2 to 3 times a week for the next probably year. And then I felt like I was making better videos, but, didn't have everything go crazy. I think, so from 0 to 01, from 2018 to 2019, this would have been 900 followers. From 2019 to 2020, probably around 15,000 followers. And I was making a little bit of money through ad revenue and that thing. And then COVID hit. And then I think June 2020, I moved out to California with one of my best friends. And I was actually looking at getting potentially a part-time job because I was like, I'm making like a little bit of money, but like I don't want to dip further into my savings that I had from Deloitte. But I was like, all right, let me just live the first month out in California and we'll see what happens. And then literally, I think 3 weeks after I moved out there, I had several videos kind of spike off one another. And literally, like overnight, it turned into enough to, cover rent and basically be full-time income. And then I was like, oh, dang, like, let's just keep this thing rolling. So that's kind of what I did for the next couple of years. And then probably 16 or 17 months ago, or after I moved to California, I didn't really know like where I wanted to take the channel or what I wanted to do. And I wanted to do kind of travel content and make better and deeper dive, not deep dive in the sense that we're making them today. But my idea was to like go spend a full year abroad and be making videos. So what I actually did was I went to France. I gave up my apartment. I had no like residence in the US. The plan was to do 3 months in France and then 3 months in another probably European country, 3 months. But when I got over to France, I realized it was really hard to make the level of quality of video that I wanted to make while being abroad. And I ended up just spending a lot of time in the apartments and was just like, man, I want to make these videos, but I need to figure out a better way to do it and make this sustainable, because I don't want to make kind of generic like travel or vlog videos. Like I want to get into deeper topics, and it was hard to do that while I was abroad. So that trip really changed a lot for me and made me think about a lot more about the future of like what I want to do as kind of like a food YouTuber, if you will. And that's really like, that's kind of the nexus of what led me down this whole Cookwell path, and trying to think about a way that I could make it. In the beginning, it was just like, I want to make this more sustainable for myself, where I don't need to like worry about like all these brand deals, and I don't need to worry about like, or I don't need to worry about having a brand deal on every single video, or I'm not so tied to like, well, if this video doesn't do well, that's a big risk, and I don't want to have to spend, and like that was a genuine thing at the time, because I was like, man, I'm spending a lot of money in like France, and like the apartments aren't cheap, or the Airbnbs, and I was just like, man, I don't know if this is the right path for me. So that's kind of what led me down to this, past year or two, where we've really been vetting out Cookwell and trying to figure out like, how could we make something that like I fully believe in and I want to tell you guys about. Like I want to build it for you. It's valuable, and it can also support content that I can just continually release without just feeling like I need to chase like views and money and these things. Like I just don't want to do that. I just want to make videos that I find very interesting and make them hopefully interesting and educational for all of you. And that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I don't like, if Cookwell works, like I couldn't be more excited, but if it doesn't work, like I'm happy just making videos and kind of hanging out. So I either want to kind of take the big swing and strike out, or if we hit it out, great. And then we can help a lot of other creators in the process and help all of you home cooks in the process. But if it doesn't work, I think I'll be like pretty happy that I at least tried to do it. And, I can always like just continue making videos that I love making. So I think that's a good spot to end this video. Hopefully you guys are had a good year. I'm really excited for 2025 and 2026 and beyond. Really thinking about this in terms of decades now. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully you guys have a good holiday. Hopefully you have a good new year. Let me know down in the comments about anything related to this video. I don't know where we're going to end it. But anyway, that will wrap it up for me in this one. I will catch you all in the next one. Peace, y'all.